In August 2011, a search and recovery diver working with the El Dorado County Sheriff's Department located a body on an underwater shelf off Rubicon Point at a depth of about 265 feet. Dental records later confirmed it was a scuba diver who had gone missing in the lake 17 years earlier in 1994. The body was almost perfectly preserved, and the recovery reminded the lake's search and rescue community of something they already knew. The cold is not incidental to Lake Tahoe's danger. It is the mechanism behind it. Lake Tahoe does not give back what it takes easily. The lake is so deep and so cold that bodies of drowning victims frequently do not surface the way they would in a warmer, shallower lake. Below a certain depth, the water temperature sits just above freezing, and at that temperature, the bacterial activity that produces the decomposition gases needed to float a body back to the surface slows to almost nothing. Bodies can stay down there for years, essentially unchanged. This destination is loved by millions of visitors every year, but what most people don't know is the dark truth hidden beneath its beauty. Stay until the end to discover the shocking reality. Lake Tahoe sits at 6,225 feet above sea level on the border of California and Nevada, cradled between the Sierra Nevada to the west and the Carson Range to the east. It is the largest alpine lake in North America by surface area. 191 square miles of water stretching 22 miles long and 12 miles wide. Its maximum depth is 1,645 feet, making it the second deepest lake in the United States after Crater Lake in Oregon. To put that depth in terms the human brain can actually process, if you placed the Empire State Building on the lake floor at its deepest point, the antenna would not reach the surface. You could stack the Empire State Building on top of itself, and still have hundreds of feet of water above it. The lake holds approximately 36.2 trillion gallons of water, enough to cover the entire state of California to a depth of 14.5 inches. The water is clear enough that objects are visible at depths of up to 70 feet, a clarity that has been declining due to algae growth and nutrient runoff, but that still exceeds almost every other large lake in the world. The surrounding peaks rise to over 10,000 feet. The Desolation Wilderness to the west, the Mount Rose Wilderness to the east, and the Carson Iceberg Wilderness to the south create a ring of alpine terrain that generates its own weather, channels its own winds, and delivers hazards to the lake's surface with a speed that the lake's resort reputation does not prepare visitors for. In peak summer season, Lake Tahoe draws approximately 15 million visitors annually to its beaches, casinos, ski resorts, hiking trails, and marinas. It exists simultaneously as a luxury resort destination, a family vacation spot, a world-class ski area, and one of the most geographically extreme bodies of water in North America. And the gap between the resort and that reality is where people die. The temperature of Lake Tahoe is the foundational fact of its danger, and it's a fact the lake's appearance systematically conceals. The surface temperature in July and August, peak swimming season, ranges from about 65 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit near shore. Cold, by the standards of most swimming destinations, but manageable. What the surface doesn't reveal is what's happening below it. Lake Tahoe is thermally stratified. The warm surface layer, the epilimnion, extends to a depth of roughly 30 to 40 feet in summer. Below that, temperature drops sharply through a transition zone called the thermocline. Below the thermocline, the water sits between 39 and 41 degrees Fahrenheit, just above freezing, year-round, regardless of how warm the surface feels. A swimmer who enters from a warm beach, swims out 50 yards, and dives down 40 feet has moved from 65-degree water to 40-degree water in seconds. The physiological response to that transition, cold shock, the involuntary gasp reflex, sudden muscle incapacitation, can occur faster than the swimmer can react. This is not theoretical. It is the mechanism behind a significant portion of Lake Tahoe's drowning deaths, and it is invisible from the surface. The lake looks the same at 65 degrees and at 40 degrees. The 4th of July weekend is consistently the most dangerous period on Lake Tahoe. Peak visitation, alcohol consumption, warm air temperatures that encourage swimming, and cold water combine into conditions that the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office, the Placer County Sheriff's Office, and the Douglas County Sheriff's Office in Nevada respond to every year with grim regularity. Between 2000 and 2020, Lake Tahoe recorded an estimated 10 to 15 drowning deaths per year across its California and Nevada jurisdictions. The exact number is hard to pin down because the lake crosses a state line and multiple counties, each maintaining its own data. What's consistent across jurisdictions is the pattern. Most drowning victims are male, most are between 18 and 35, most were not wearing life jackets, and alcohol is a factor in most cases. That last point is structural, not incidental. Lake Tahoe's resort culture. Casinos on the Nevada side, beach bars, boat rentals, the summer party atmosphere keeps alcohol and water in constant proximity. Alcohol impairs swimming ability, judgment about distance and cold, and the ability of both the swimmer and onlookers to recognize distress in time. The cold water doesn't distinguish between a sober swimmer and an intoxicated one. The boats on Lake Tahoe present a separate category of danger, with its own documented record of deaths and serious injuries. Roughly 65,000 registered watercraft operate on the lake during peak season. Lake Tahoe's 191 square miles sound vast, until you consider that on a summer weekend, those boats concentrate near marinas, beaches, and popular anchorages, creating traffic densities the lake's open appearance doesn't suggest. Carbon monoxide poisoning from boat engines is a documented cause of death on Lake Tahoe that gets almost no public attention. Exhaust from a boat's engine can accumulate in the water directly behind it, the swim platform area, where people hang off the back of the boat. A swimmer in that zone can be exposed to carbon monoxide concentrations that cause loss of consciousness within minutes, with no smell, no warning, and no visible sign the water is dangerous. The U.S. Coast Guard has documented carbon monoxide deaths on recreational boats nationwide, and Lake Tahoe's high concentration of boating activity makes it a recurring location for these incidents. Victims are typically found in the water near the boat, having lost consciousness without any apparent struggle, which means witnesses often don't realize what happened until it's too late. Regulations now require carbon monoxide detectors on certain enclosed vessels, but that requirement doesn't address the risk in the open water directly behind a boat, where exhaust pools in a zone that's invisible and odorless. Beneath all of it, beneath the swimmers, the boats, the algae-softened clarity, sits a piece of Lake Tahoe's history that has nothing to do with drowning or cold water at all, and almost nothing to do with the present day. It has to do with what the lake bed itself is made of, and what it did once before. Sometime between roughly 21,000 and 12,000 years ago, a chunk of the lake's western wall, an estimated 10 to 12 cubic kilometers of rock and sediment, broke free and slid across the lake floor, traveling as far as 9 miles from where it started. Geologists call it the McKinney Bay landslide, and it's the second largest landslide of its kind found anywhere on the continent, smaller only than the one that took out the side of Mount Shasta. It's the reason the lake's western shoreline bulges outward the way it does today. The bay itself is the scar. The slide didn't just rearrange the lake floor, it moved enough water, fast enough, to send a wave sloshing up onto the shorelines around the lake. A landslide-generated tsunami. Researchers have mapped a 2-meter thick sheet of clean sand at the lake's south end, deposited by that wave, and rows of boulder ridges on a submerged shelf near Tahoe City. Arranged by the current, the slide kicked up as it moved. This is not folklore. It's documented in peer-reviewed geological literature, mapped with sonar, sampled with dredge hulls and submersible cameras. What makes it more than an ancient curiosity is what's still down there. The unfailed portion of that same unstable shelf near Tahoe City, geologists call it the Tahoe City Shelf, sits on the same kind of poorly consolidated sediment that gave way the first time, and researchers who've studied it say it could fail again, generating another landslide and another wave. The lake basin also has at least 3 known active fault lines running through it, including one that produced a pair of small earthquakes, magnitude 4.2 and 3.1, in the spring of 2022. Scientists estimate a major quake on one of those faults, on the order of magnitude 7, could generate waves 10 to 30 feet high. No one is suggesting this is an imminent threat, and geologists are careful to say so. The last event happened over the span of roughly 10,000 years, not 10, But it sits underneath every other statistic in this list as a reminder that the calm, glassy surface of Lake Tahoe is sitting on top of a lake bed that has produced a genuine tsunami before, using nothing but its own geology and gravity, with no storm and no warning at all. Kayaks and paddleboards face a different hazard: the lake's wind. Lake Tahoe sits in a basin surrounded by mountains that channel and accelerate wind in specific patterns. Prevailing winds come from the southwest, but afternoon thermal winds, generated by the temperature differential between the lake surface and the surrounding terrain, can develop from multiple directions at once, creating confused seas that are disproportionately dangerous for small, non-motorized watercraft. The National Weather Service issues small craft advisories for Lake Tahoe when wind speeds are forecast to exceed 15 knots, and on summer afternoons those advisories come with regularity. Search and rescue records on the lake include kayakers who launched in calm morning conditions and were still on open water when the afternoon wind arrived. Caught in 2 to 4 foot waves, manageable for a motorized vessel, but potentially capsizing for a kayak, miles from shore, above 40-degree water they'd go into if they capsized. The lake's clarity works against a paddler in that situation. The water looks close, the shore looks close, the depth is invisible, the cold is invisible, and the wind, which wasn't there an hour ago, is now pushing them further from where they need to be. The winter dimension of Lake Tahoe's danger is almost entirely separate from its summer profile. The surrounding ski resorts, Palisades Tahoe, Heavenly, North Star, Sierra at Tahoe, and others, draw millions of skiers and snowboarders every winter. These are managed environments with avalanche control, groomed runs, ski patrol, and emergency response infrastructure, and by the standards of mountain recreation, they are relatively safe. The backcountry surrounding them is not, and as one case shows, inbounds doesn't always mean the danger has been fully removed either. The Sierra Nevada receives some of the heaviest snowfall in North America. Palisades Tahoe's base area averages over 400 inches a year. That snowpack has a structural quirk that makes it prone to dangerous avalanche conditions, a phenomenon called faceting. When cold, clear nights follow warm days, a common pattern in the Sierra, snow crystals near the surface transform into weak, angular grains that bond poorly with the layers above and below them. These faceted layers get buried under later snowfall and persist through the winter, creating weak layers that can fail catastrophically when additional load, new snow, a skier, a shift in temperature, is applied. The result is a snowpack that can look stable and then release without warning, producing avalanches that travel at speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour. On January 17, 2020, an avalanche broke loose at Alpine Meadows, now part of Palisades Tahoe, inside the resort boundary on a run that had reopened that morning after avalanche mitigation work. 2 skiers were caught. Cole Comstock, 34, was killed. His friend Kaylee Bloom survived with severe injuries. Both Comstock's widow and Bloom later sued the resort, alleging the run had been reopened prematurely, and that the mitigation work performed that day had been inadequate given the previous night's heavy snowfall and an active avalanche watch. The lawsuits were settled in 2022. The incident is a reminder that avalanche control reduces risk on resort terrain. It doesn't eliminate it. Outside the resort boundary, the risk is unmanaged by design. The Sierra Avalanche Center issues daily, scientifically grounded avalanche forecasts for the region, and they're freely available online. In the backcountry skiing community, those forecasts are sometimes treated as a starting point for a personal risk assessment rather than a final answer, and backcountry travelers' own assessments of a specific slope, aspect, and recent weather are sometimes wrong. In avalanche terrain, being wrong once is enough. Better touring equipment has made more of that terrain more accessible to more people in recent years. The avalanche hazard hasn't adjusted to accommodate the added traffic. The lake itself doesn't freeze. Its enormous volume stores enough thermal energy that the surface never reaches freezing, even in the coldest winters, and most visitors know or can easily learn this. What's less widely known is that the smaller lakes and ponds in the Tahoe Basin, Fallen Leaf Lake, Cascade Lake, Marlette Lake, and dozens of others, do freeze, and their ice is subject to the same variability that makes ice on any mountain lake unpredictable. Ice thickness on these smaller lakes isn't uniform. It varies with depth, with water movement beneath the surface, with springs or inflows, and with the temperature history of the preceding weeks. A lake that was safely frozen last week may not be safely frozen this week if temperatures rose and then fell again. The surface looks the same either way. The structural integrity does not. And search and rescue agencies in the basin have responded to fatal breakthroughs on these smaller lakes when the ice looked solid and wasn't. The hiking terrain surrounding Lake Tahoe carries hazards the lake's resort identity tends to underrepresent. The Tahoe Rim Trail, a 165-mile loop around the lake, crossing both the Sierra Nevada and the Carson Range, passes through terrain above 10,000 feet in multiple sections, exposed alpine ground where afternoon thunderstorms and sudden temperature drops catch day hikers in summer clothing unprepared. The Desolation Wilderness, directly west of the lake, is one of the most heavily visited wilderness areas in the country, sitting at elevations between 6,000 and 10,000 feet, where snow can fall in any month and afternoon. Thunderstorms build over the peaks with the same speed and regularity that defines the Sierra Nevada all summer. Lightning deaths in the Sierra Nevada are rare in absolute terms, but they follow a consistent pattern where they do occur. The victim was on exposed terrain, a ridge, a summit, an open meadow above tree line, when a storm arrived that had been visible, building from lower elevations well before it reached them. The pattern repeats because the Sierra's afternoon thunderstorm cycle repeats. The storms build, they arrive, terrain above treeline offers no shelter. There's a hazard at Lake Tahoe, with no real equivalent at most other recreational destinations in the American West. The combination of elevation and exertion. At 6,225 feet, the air contains roughly 20% less oxygen than at sea level. For visitors arriving from low-elevation cities, Sacramento, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Las Vegas, that's not immediately obvious. The air feels thin, exertion feels harder, but the body's acute response to altitude typically takes 6 to 24 hours to fully develop. That creates a window of vulnerability. Visitors arrive, feel fine, engage in strenuous activity, skiing, hiking, swimming, kayaking, and experience the effects of altitude during or after that activity, already physically stressed and potentially far from care. Acute mountain sickness at 6,225 feet isn't common, but it's documented. More significant is altitude's effect on cardiovascular load. The heart works harder at elevation to deliver the same oxygen to the muscles. And for visitors with an undiagnosed cardiac condition, the combination of altitude and strenuous activity can trigger an event that wouldn't have occurred at sea level. The area's hospitals in South Lake Tahoe and Truckee are adequate for a resort community, but aren't level 1 trauma centers. For serious cardiac events or major trauma, definitive care may require helicopter transport, which is subject to the same weather constraints as every other aerial operation in the mountains. There's one more hazard at Lake Tahoe that has nothing to do with water, snow, or altitude, and everything to do with geography. The basin only has a handful of ways out. The roads that connect the Tahoe Basin to the rest of California and Nevada are limited. A small number of 2-lane highways threading through mountain passes, several of which close in winter storms and all of which funnel tens of thousands of vehicles through narrow forested corridors. In good conditions, that's an inconvenience. In an emergency, it's a bottleneck. On August 30th, 2021, the Caldor Fire, which had been burning in El Dorado County since mid-August, pushed across Highway 50 and into the Tahoe Basin itself. Local officials ordered a mandatory evacuation of the entire city of South Lake Tahoe, a community of roughly 22,000 people, along with the surrounding areas. The result was immediate, severe gridlock. Vehicles loaded with bikes, camping gear, and boats sat and stopped traffic on Highway 50 as thick brown smoke settled over the road, and embers carried up to a mile ahead of the fire itself. Barton Memorial Hospital, the community's main hospital, had already evacuated all of its patients to facilities elsewhere the night before. Across the fire's broader footprint, more than 50,000 people were displaced from El Dorado, Amador, and Alpine counties combined. The Caldor Fire was, at the time, only the second fire on record to burn completely across the Sierra Nevada, from one side to the other. It was contained without the mass casualty outcome that similar limited egress evacuations have produced elsewhere in California. But the traffic footage from that Monday afternoon, a single mountain highway, backed up for miles, Smoke closing in from behind is what emergency planners point to when they talk about the basin's evacuation math. A resort built for 15 million annual visitors, connected to the outside world by a handful of two-lane roads, in a fire-prone forest that gets drier and more flammable every summer. The missing persons record at Lake Tahoe is complicated by the same jurisdictional fragmentation as the drowning data. The lake crosses the state line, and the surrounding terrain is managed by the U.S. Forest Service, the Nevada Division of State Lands, and 4 different counties. Missing persons cases are handled by whichever jurisdiction the person was last seen in, and the data doesn't aggregate into one public record. What is documented is that people go missing in the basin with regularity, and that the terrain, the lake's depth, the surrounding wilderness, the winter snowpack, makes recovery difficult and sometimes impossible. The lake floor at its deepest points has never been mapped comprehensively at high resolution. The technology exists, but the cost and logistics of surveying 191 square miles of lake bottom to a resolution fine enough to identify something the size of a human body haven't been applied across the whole lake. What's on the floor in the unsurveyed sections is genuinely unknown. Lake Tahoe is marketed as a place of extraordinary natural beauty that's also extraordinarily accessible. 2 hours from Sacramento, 4 from San Francisco, a short flight from Los Angeles, world-class skiing and beaches and dining. All of that is real. What the marketing doesn't communicate is that the lake sits at 6,225 feet in the Sierra Nevada, that its water is 40 degrees a few dozen feet down, that its terrain generates avalanches and lightning, and afternoon winds strong enough to capsize a kayak, and that its jurisdictional complexity leaves the emergency response safety net more fragmented than the resort environment suggests. The resort creates an expectation of managed risk. The mountain doesn't always deliver on it. Lake Tahoe is worth every visit. The view from the rim of the basin, turquoise water near shore fading to deep cobalt at the center, the Sierra Nevada behind it, the Nevada desert visible to the east, is one of the most extraordinary panoramas in North America. Skiing Palisades Tahoe. On a clear January morning, fresh snow on the peaks, and the lake visible from the upper lifts, has no real equivalent in the American West, but the lake asks something specific in return. Wear a life jacket on the water, because the water below the thermocline is 40 degrees and the shore is farther than it looks. Check the avalanche forecast before entering the backcountry, and treat an elevated hazard rating as a reason to change your plans, not a factor to weigh against a line you want to ski. Be off exposed terrain before the afternoon storms build. Understand that the clarity of the water has nothing to do with its safety. The Washoe people, who have lived in the Tahoe Basin for at least 9,000 years, called the lake Da'o Ege, edge of the lake. They understood its moods and its capacity for both violence and beauty. It has not been made safe for the 15 million people who visit it each year. It has been made comfortable. Those aren't the same thing. Lake Tahoe is not the last place where the gap between a destination's reputation and its reality has written itself into a record that most visitors never read. Next time, we go somewhere that most people consider the crown jewel of the American National Park System, a place so geologically violent, so thermally extreme, and so systematically misunderstood that its danger has been hiding behind its own spectacle since the day it opened to the public.